Now we're recording. I am here in Melbourne, Florida on Wednesday, November the 6th, 2019 with Colonel Hal Gibson. My name is David Gregory and I have known Colonel Gibson for well over 40 years and continue to be one of his students and continue to learn from him every day and in every way. As I said, we're here in Melbourne, so Colonel Gibson, I know you're not from Melbourne originally, but tell us how you wound up in Melbourne. And if you don't mind, give us a little background on your work, your teaching, and your professions, your professional positions. How all of that worked together to bring you here in Melbourne. So if you don't mind, Colonel Gibson, take it away.
Well, I had retired somewhat recently from the Schwab School of Music, where I was director of bands for some 17 years. And prior to that, I had retired from a rather long military career that had taken me literally all over the world. We had no particular place that we had to go. We weren't trying to move with family or to be near any particular place. We looked about at several places. We looked in Texas, somewhat in Oklahoma, where we are both from. But I had a neighbor in Columbus that kept insisting that I look into this Indian River Colony Club, which was a retirement community for military officers of all services. At that time, it was 100% military officers. Since then, we have changed our bylaws where we can have 20% non-military, but it is still basically a military community. And we looked it over, and after some deliberation, decided that this would be a good place for it. As it turned out, it's been a perfect place for us. We had suffered a family tragedy a few years before my retirement. Our only son, who was a naval aviator, was lost at sea, and that was a very, very extremely unfortunate event for us. Coming to the Indian River Colony Club, which is better known as IRCC, we met so many new friends. The camaraderie that we experienced here was exactly like being in the military. And both of us became very involved, not only in the community, but as far as I was concerned, in the Melbourne and Brevard County community. Before I even moved here, I was contacted by officers of the Melbourne Municipal Band to see if I would work with them on occasion. In fact, they wanted me to work there every week, and I said no, that was not what I had moved here for. But since then, I've been involved with several groups. I started the Wind Ensemble of the Melbourne Municipal Band, and it's a group of the better players from three of the bands. They're the select players, and we have limited rehearsals and do more complex music than the regular community band. So that has been a large thing. A few years after moving here, I started a little group within the community called Colony Singers, and I wrote a lot of the things for them. I write nearly everything that they do, both the accompaniment and for the singers. That's been a very popular group throughout the community, and we do runouts as well. So that's how we ended up here in Melbourne, Florida. And as it's worked out, we have now been here for 26 years, which is more than a fourth of my lifetime. So,
well, that your tenure here in Melbourne is one that many people would envy as an entire professional career, and yours is after at least two other very successful careers. You grew up, I believe you mentioned you grew up in Oklahoma. Tell us how an Oklahoma boy would grow up to be a person who traveled literally the entire world, and where did you receive your education in music, and how did you find your way into the military and become literally one of the better well-known international musicians and conductors of our time? How did you get started from Oklahoma? How did you go from Oklahoma to the military?
I think the situation is not that I found the military, but the military found me. I was in high school, class in high school, and my senior year was 1941-42. Obviously, our engagement in the Second World War began on the 7th of December, 1941. And I completed high school, and one of our former ABA members, he is also a president of the CBDNA, and that would be Dr. James Nielsen. He was well, he was everything at Oklahoma City University. He did the band, the orchestra, the choir. He was Mr. Music there. And while I was still in high school, he contacted me and asked if I would perform with his college groups. And for me, that was rather exciting, and I did. I played with the band and the orchestra. So when it came time to begin college, there was no question that he had said, "You are coming to OCU, that's it." And he told me about this situation that they had for young men in colleges at that time. It was called the Army Specialized Training Program. And it was a program for college students who would probably be sent for further higher education, primarily in the engineering fields. We were all called in at the same time. We all took basic training together. We took more additional testing there to see where our proclivities really lay, and nearly all of us were put in basic engineering. And I was determined that I, at that point, did not want to go back to college. I certainly didn't want to study engineering, and I happened to see that they were looking for people to fly airplanes. And I thought, well, that would be much, much better than going back to school to study engineering, particularly as I detested math. So I applied for the aviation cadet program, took those tests, very demanding, both mentally and physically. We took physical exams like one a month, and I mean, they were exhausting. But I did have even better than 20/20 vision. That was one of the main requirements. And so that's where I learned to fly. And more than 75 years later, I still do that on a weekly basis. I have now a little experimental plane. It's called a RANS S-12. And it's a very, very basic airplane, but it takes off and flies around, does everything that I'm interested in doing at this point in my life.
Well, you obviously have a great interest in flying, and you've kept it up for 75 years. That was a major part of your military service, is that correct?
It was. I spent a lot of time, of course, in training. But after the war, almost immediately after, I began training to become an FAA certified flight instructor. And so for over 50 years, I was an FAA, they're called a CFII. I was CFII, Certified Flight Instructor Instruments, instruments as well as flying the airplane.
Well, your career, your history, your experiences with flight are enviable, among other things. Your music and your writing, your music writings, your touring. So many aspects of your life are enviable, Colonel Gibson. And obviously you have such a great love for flying. How did you get into music? Did one day the plane wouldn't go up and you decided to go to a concert? I mean, how did we get to that? How did you become the international person that you are?
I'd always been, I was a musician. Flying was just ancillary to what I did. While I was in high school, there was a program that was similar to the WPA, that was a program instigated by Franklin Roosevelt. But they also had a national youth activity, NYA, and a lot of people are not aware of this, but during that period of the WPA, a lot of support was given to our symphony orchestras. They would have had a great deal of many problems trying to survive without the help of the federal government. And so they started these national youth orchestras. I believe there were 4. But there was one for the Southwest, and I auditioned for that and became a member. And that was the first time that I was paid to play the French horn. I thought this is really the way things are supposed to happen. As it happened, we played all over a lot of the facilities that had been erected by the WPA, and it was exciting for a young high school player going all over the state and actually the Southwest, performing with this orchestra with some of the wonderful soloists they had. But we were scheduled to perform in December 1941 the Tchaikovsky piano concerto. That was to be a Sunday night. And that Sunday, I was at my grandparents listening to the radio on their automobile radio. The NBC Symphony played every Sunday afternoon. I never missed that. And they interrupted the broadcast to say the Imperial forces of the Japanese had bombed our base at Pearl Harbor. So I went in to tell my grandparents that they had bombed Pearl Harbor, and their first reaction was, "Where is that?" Hardly anybody even knew where it was. But we realized it was very serious. That night, if you can imagine, we went to perform this concert with everyone in the audience realizing that we were at war. A very, very somber evening. I'll never, never forget it. So I realized as the war had begun that that would be the end of the National Youth Orchestra. But as it worked out, very soon after that, a lot of the first people that were brought into the service already had found their way through various units. And so there was an opening in the Oklahoma Symphony, and I was accepted to play horn in the Oklahoma Symphony, and that was one of the great experiences of my life, actually. The conductor was Victor Alessandro, a very charismatic, very musical person. And I was so impressed with everything that he did. First of all, he was a handsome young man. He was a very young conductor, and had a marvelous way on the podium. And I thought, that's what I've got to do. Victor Alessandro was really the inspiration. I said, that's what I want to do. Exactly what he is doing. Although we rehearsed every night of the week, 3 hours, because we did a national broadcast once a week on a mutual radio network. No television, of course, in those days. And we had the top soloists in the world, you name it, they were just all there. So it was just a thrill for me to sit in that professional orchestra of some 90 players and to be surrounded by these incredible musicians playing this marvelous music. And that lasted until all of us in the Army Specialized Training Program were called into the service. And of course, that was the end. And so I did my time in the service, about 4 years. And when I was discharged at the end of World War II, I came back and realized, first of all, I was a professional player. I played in the studio, played Monogram Studio in Hollywood. And that was a Class B. They did the Roy Rogers and Donald O'Connor films. But also, I had auditioned for the Mexico City Symphony before I was called into the Army. And so I went to Mexico and played under Carlos Chavez, another wonderful experience. And finally realized I've got to get back in school to complete my education and do the things I want to do. So I went back to Oklahoma City University, where I had been in school, and met this beautiful blonde girl who was also a music major. And she was 4 years younger than me, but since I'd been away for 4 years, that put us in the same grade. And it didn't take me even a year to convince her that she should marry me. And, I don't know which of us was the most surprised, if it was my wife Marie or me, that she finally said okay. And at that point, I said, I think we need to go to a bigger school. And I had applied to both Southern Methodist University, that had a very fine music program at that time, and Northwestern. That's always had a good music program. But I was told when I was looking about these schools that were I to come to Dallas, where SMU is located, I would have so many playing opportunities. So obviously that's what I did. And that was the case. I almost, as soon as I arrived in Dallas, became what's called the first call horn player for the union and the contract. In other words, when a new show comes and they're assembling the orchestra, you're the first one that they call. So there were, so many opportunities in those days. Dallas had a large musical season, and the musicals ran 2 to 3 weeks. I played for the extra part. They did Richard Strauss and so forth, but the Dallas Symphony, that was Untitled. I started playing on the Bell Telephone Orchestra of WFAA and the regular WFAA Symphony Orchestra. So I was playing virtually every night of the week. But also at that time, I was approached to be the band leader of a new Army division that was being formed for the National Guard in Dallas. And I was a bit reluctant at first because I was so busy. I was going to school, and actually I was already teaching high school, that I'll explain later, and playing all over Dallas. But they convinced me that this would be a good move, and I would be given extra pay for being the commander, and that sort of clinched the thing that I should become the band leader. Well, we started this band from nothing, and it was my job to see that it got staffed. We had to meet certain requirements over certain periods of time to get what was called federal recognition, to really be a unit that would be a part of the Army's National Guard. And of course, I was at SMU, and I was talking to all these veterans. We were all veterans there. And the last thing they wanted to do was put on an Army uniform again. So it was tough. And then one night in 1948, I went to my regular Tuesday night rehearsal, and there were about 75 people sitting on the lawn outside my building. That week they had initiated a draft. And so the National Guard looked like the perfect place. So from then on, I have always had more players than I could use. And I decided we need to have some outreach for that band. There was a professional football team in Dallas. It was certainly not the Cowboys, but it was the Dallas Texans. And I told them that a person by the name of Lamar owned that. And I went to him and I said, listen, you need a band. And I can provide for you band for all of your football games, and we'll work out what the compensation would be, which was 4 tickets for each of the players. And I convinced my division commander that we had the opportunity to really make a big showing. My band, the authorized strength of a division band is 64 players. I said, I need 100 players. I need 100 uniforms. And the division commander agreed, said, yes, sir, that'd be a wonderful thing. So this band really became well known to nearly all of Texas. And then they began, in all the National Guard units, what was called the Eisenhower Trophy, that would be awarded to the company-sized unit, the outstanding company-sized unit in each state. Well, there were 585 company-sized units in Texas. They had 3 divisions, all kinds of National Guard units everywhere. And the first year that that trophy was awarded, my band was selected as the most outstanding unit in the whole state of Texas. Well, of course, that caught the eye of a lot of people in the Army band field. And it was not too much longer after that that I came out ordered going back into the service as an Army band leader. And I was assigned as the band leader of the 4th Armored Division, which was being prepared to go to Germany. It was a red-hot unit. And they were very, very selective. In fact, when I first joined the unit, the division commander, a 2-star general, was named Verdi B. Barnes. And he called me to his office one day. He said, do you know what the B stands for in my name? I said, no, sir, I'm not aware. He said, that stands for Beethoven. He said, my name is Verdi Beethoven Barnes. My father was an itinerant band leader. He said, so I have this great love of bands. Well, I thought, my day has come. I am really set. And as I say, this was a very, very select unit. It wasn't very long that that division commander was relieved, and they sent one of the toughest generals in the entire army to whip this unit into shape for Germany. That would be General Andrew P. O'Meara. He is a legend. When he arrived on the scene, he was relieving officers right and left. First Sunday he went to church. He came out of the service, the chaplain said, "Oh, it's so nice to have you here, General. I hope you enjoyed the sermon." He said, "I did not at all, and you're relieved. I'll have a new chaplain next Sunday." And that's how he operated. But somehow I always got along with General O'Meara, and I escaped his wrath. And in fact, he told me right after he assumed command that he had been to Germany, and the 7th Army was the army in Germany, and the commander of the 7th Army was Bruce Clark. He said, "I met with General Clark, 4-star general, and General Clark says the main thing that we have to do is really create and cement relations with the Germans. And said the Germans love music. The best way to do that is with our bands." And he said, I want the best bands we can have. So General O'Meara came back, called me to his office. He said, "I've just come back from 7th Army with General Bruce Clark, and he said he wants the best band, and if he does, I am going to have the best band. Can you provide that for me?" I said, "Without a doubt, sir." I was very young and arrogant. And he said, "I don't care what size this band is. Anybody in this division you want, you can have." "Yes, sir." I said, "I think we're speaking the same language." And right after that, he said, "I want my band to have the dress blue uniform." Every man in that division, 15,000 men, were assessed, I think it was $2 or $3 to buy uniform for the band. And that's kind of support that we had. And it was a very good band. I had, like 85, 90 players all the time. And the highlight of my time with that band was an international band festival in Erlangen, Germany. Erlangen is kind of a suburb of Nuremberg. And there were 16 army bands in Europe at that time. But my band really was unquestionably one that should go to this festival. So we were sent up there, and while we're just getting ready to play, there is a Dutch band, professional Dutch band. All the players had tails. And I heard this band, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're not in that category at all. So I told my first sergeant, he spoke 9 languages, really a great, great help to me. I said, "You've got to go get us out of this competition." I said, "We can't go back and tell that division commander that we came in 10th or 20th, and there were 80 bands here." He said, "Yes, sir." So we came back, and I said, "You got us out of the competition," and he was rather non-committal, but sort of nodded. So we went to the competition in a beautiful, beautiful old castle. The auditorium was just incredible, and the acoustics were just without par. And I remember giving that first downbeat, and I thought, my God, what band is this? This is not my band. I've never heard them band like that. And when we played, I even remember the first thing that we opened with, Amper Rita Rocca. And then the next thing we played was the Prelude to the Meistersinger. And they sounded like the Berlin Philharmonic. So the bottom line was, out of 80 bands from 22 countries, the 4th Armed Band was named the winner of the concert competition. And what surprised me even more, we were declared the winner of the marching band competition. So that was a highlight. But one of the fun things that we did, after we were there about 2 years, all of my young draftees had completed their time of service and they were sent back home. And so I was left really just to cadre the old professional soldiers. But I had gone to a ceremony that was around a bonfire, and the Germans all had these open horns, the Wald horns, they're forest horn. No valves, of course, open horns. And it was such a transforming experience. I just was lifted up. All these people so solemn around this bonfire and this big choir of Wald horns playing. And I thought, oh, I'm going to start something like that. So I started a Bavarian band. And I remember discussing with that first sergeant that I just mentioned, I said, you know, there's a problem. There are no black Bavarians. And I had a lot of black soldiers in my cadre. I said, I don't know. I don't want to say they don't have the opportunity to play. He said, just bring them in. So we did, and that was one of the best things that ever happened. This band would be marching down the street, and it was a very good band, because these were all professional soldiers playing. And the people are listening and hearing, we played all original Bavarian music. And then they would look and see these black players, and they'd all just burst out laughing. And we were featured in one of the main newspapers there, the Outdoor Gazette. It was better known as the Pistol Gazette, kind of like the New York Daily Mirror. But on the cover was this black French euphonium player, Sergeant Kirkendall. It said, "The Black Johnny from America thrills the Germans." And another thing, they had never seen sousaphones. And so the sousaphone player realized that they'd have the horn down. Then when we get ready to play, they would hoist them up, and the Germans all laughed and were so surprised at that. So the Bavarian band was a huge hit throughout Germany. And I know one of my players said, "Let's not ever start the military band again. Let's just do this." I said, "Well, that's not quite what we're able to do." But when I did reach my rotation time and was ready to return to the States, I had an exit interview with the general, who was now the third one that we'd had. And he said, "Now, I want you to be sure and brief this new band leader on the Bavarian band." He said, "I want that." I said, "Well, sir, he might not be interested in doing that." He said, "That's not the point, that we're going to have that band." He said, "That's the hottest thing in Germany." So our experience in Germany was very rewarding. I was gone all the time. We were very much overcommitted, because the division was spread out all over Germany, and we were expected just to play for everybody there. And then with all the performance that we gave, it was very demanding, and we were overcommitted, definitely. But I came back. In fact, I had been giving some thought to getting out of the Army and returning to civilian life as a school band leader, either at the high school or university level. And then I realized I was getting a very, very good assignment, one of the Army bands. And right after I got back to the States, I was here just 2 months, and I was assigned as one of the assistant leaders of the U.S. Army Field Band. So I did that, and then I was asked to take a job as a staff officer because of my previous experience with school bands and so forth. And I traveled all over, half of the country actually, auditioning bands, and it was my responsibility to keep them staffed. And I realized that I'd gone to this point without mentioning that very soon after I moved to Dallas, I became the leader of the Irving High School Band. And I had not even finished college when I had that job. But it was very soon after the war, and they were anxious, of course, to get men back in the classroom for positions like coaches and band leader. Because during World War II, there were no men left. They were all in the service. So I was the band leader at Irving High School, and we had a good bit of success with that band. It was a very fine concert band, but also I started a show band. In fact, the terminology for these bands was something that was never fully decided upon. This was in Texas, and Texas was loaded with Southern Baptists, so you couldn't call it a dance band. I mean, that was just an anathema. And so it was kind of a show band that we would terminate. But my band entered the first big contest for the what we would now call the jazz programs. And I was very fortunate at Irving High School. I was given pretty much free rein to do what I wanted. And my jazz band had a regular rehearsal time. Strangely enough, it was 1 o'clock, which is the same time as the famous North Texas band. But my high school show band won the very first prize, #1, out of, I think there were 25 bands at Brownwood. And one of my players, name happened to be Daryl Chambers, was selected as the most outstanding player of the entire competition. Daryl, incidentally, later became a school band director himself, of course, and was the the head of the music department for the Dallas Public Schools. But after I'm jumping around a bit, if I had this staff job, which I really didn't care for, I'm a band leader. My job is on the podium, not sitting out telling some other band leader what he should be doing. And so I was sent to the military academy at West Point for 2 reasons. Well, for the band, but one of the main reasons, I was sent there to do the Cadet League Club. Well, I was in Germany with my 4th Armored Division. There was a worldwide competition in the Army for choruses. And I was told, you know, I needed to have, the band had to have a corps. So the first year, I told one of my sergeants that had a good bit of experience in the vocal area, I said, put this group together. And nothing really happened. So the next year I realized there was only one way to make it happen. And that's if I did it and said, you will be in the chorus. And so the 100% of the band was in the chorus. And we won that competition. I didn't realize so many knew about that, but they knew about it at West Point. And they wanted me to come do the Cadet Glee Club, which was again, a wonderful experience. These bright young men, oh, they memorized so quickly, far more quickly than I did, to be young. And I was very fortunate to have super accompanist. The first one I had, he could just play anything in any key and never played the same thing twice. He would always have these little fills, and just, I spent so much of my time listening to what he was going to do. And he was an E6 staff sergeant. And he came one day and said, I'm going to be leaving the band. Said, Guy Lombardo has offered me the job as one of the pen pianos. I said, well, live it up. I said, I'm proud of it. That'll be great. Well, one of the other officers came to me and said, Hal, you can't let him go. He said, that's the biggest mistake. He's leaving the West Point band. I said, well, what am I supposed to tell him? He's going to make more money than the superintendent makes. So I was at the military academy, and in the Army, there are three what are called special bands. That's the Army Band, the Army Field Band, and the West Point Band. Those bands are special. They're separate from all the other units. And if once you are accepted for one of those bands, that's your career. You stay there forever. And so they had people there that had been in the West Point Band for 30 years. And they all lived in one area. And marvelous players. I know the first time that I went in front of that band, I was not prepared for what they had. It just blew me away. And I mentioned my friend and mentor, James Nielsen. I had him up one summer. I was there a very short time as a guest conductor. And after the first rehearsal, he said, Hal, nobody knows what this band is. He said, this is one of the most incredible bands I've ever heard. And it was. It was a marvelous band. But I was there less than 2 years. And one Friday afternoon, I was getting ready to go home, and I got a call from Colonel Pentagon, and he said, for reasons that I prefer not to divulge at this time, the commander of the Army Field Band has been relieved. 10 people have been considered. You've been selected. Do you want the job? And you just heard my wife coming in. I said, oh, I have to speak with my wife first. He said, I have to know by noon on Monday. I said, yes, sir. So I talked to Marie, and she was not very anxious about it, knowing that that's a touring job. But she said, well, do you want it? I said, yes, I want it. And so about 2 weeks later, I'm on a 90-day tour. We played 90 days, 12 concerts a week, up to 12. No days off for 90 days. That's a grueling schedule. And all one-nighters, of course. And that's how I began my career with the field band. And during that first tour, I realized that we did not have the types of audiences that I thought the band deserved. We'd have like 2/3 of a house. I said, no, this band shouldn't be playing to 2/3, or in some cases half a house. So one of the first things that I began was to somehow create a totally new booking system for the band. And we did. We worked many hours on that. But we created this new system that brought about full houses, every house. I could tell the band there will be standing room. And when I began to send these reports back, every night I had to send a report of what had happened at the concert. And I was very frank on that first tour to say that the booking was not commensurate with the capability of the band. I said we needed professional bookers to do this, to really get this job done. And that's what we did. We got really some outstanding young men that really knew how to sell the band and so forth. And I began writing back these reports to the Pentagon that we were having 110% attendance. They said, that's not possible. You can't have 10% more. I said, hop on a plane and come out to our concerts. They came out and saw that not only was every seat filled, but the back of the hall was lined with standees. And I remember I had this sergeant that worked for me for, well, the whole time I was with the Washington Band. And he would tell the sponsor that we will do this, and he said, exactly 16 minutes after the standing ovation, the stage will be cleared. They said, standing ovation, you're pretty kind. He said, again, I repeat, 16 minutes after the standing, every concert ended with a standing ovation, often 2 or 3. So we really raised the whole standards of our booking procedures, and the other Washington band began to see what we were doing. They said, well, give us the secret, tell us what you're doing. And so we shared everything that we're doing, and that's how they're all booking now.
Let me interject here,
Yeah.
Colonel Gibson, and before we get to this next stage that I know is probably the culmination of a glorious career. One of the things that kept coming up as I listened to you relate this wonderful narrative was that you went into situations to see not what was there, but what could be there. The difference between sight and vision. I hear you over and over, you make comments like, well, this is where we could be, or this is what I envision for, or this is what I plan for. And I think that's one of the things that if we look at all the great men and women of our profession, certainly those such as yourself that have blazed a path for those of us who came after you, there always is that consistency of that quality, that consistency of the appearance of that quality, of the vision for what can be. And I wanted to interject that because you're repeatedly, the vision of your work in Europe and then back at West Point, now with the field band, brings you to something that has never been done before and will never be done again because of the uniqueness of the celebration it was that it brought about or was part of. And I did want to interject that because that's a very important part of this whole interview with you is for us, for those of us who shared your life, some of us very fortunate to have shared more than 40 years of it, but to see the things that younger professionals today in our business, the band business, would be asking, what does it take for me to be successful? What do I need to do? And I would think that we would point out in your fantastic career that the thing that continues to be constant throughout it was a sense of purpose and a sense of vision and the willingness to see it through. Now, after that long interjection there, take us to this next step. After this field band, where did all of this vision take you? And take us through that ride, if you will, to the next level.
Well, as you mentioned, we were approaching the 200th anniversary of our nation's founding. And there was tremendous national excitement about this event, a bicentennial. And the Department of Defense obviously wanted to get in on the act. And they began having meeting after meeting. If you know anything about the military, you know there are a lot of meetings. And I would go to these meetings, try to find a seat in the back of the hall, and gaze at the ceiling thinking, yeah, I'm getting ready to retire. I've got 30 years service. And they were talking about things of having an aircraft carrier that would go with the whole story of the Department of Defense. And then they realized, no, that would only stop at the ports on our coast. Then they decided, well, they'd take a train, and the Army Band had a big show called Prelude to Taps that was held in a huge field house every year, and had chariots and carriages and horses, and they said, let's take that. Well, I mean, that was absolutely impossible. Where are you going to park 6 horses when you could take your group to the Holiday Inn? But one day they were in this meeting. I was at the back of the hall daydreaming, as I usually was with those. And this gentleman said, well, I think we've talked about everything else, but when people think of the military, they think of bands and flags. Well, when I heard the word bands, I perked up a bit. And he said, I have this idea. I said, I want to create a band that would be made up of members of all of our 5 uniformed services. That would be the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and Coast Guard. Coast Guard being a uniformed service, not an armed service. And he said, it's got to be the best band in the world. And he said, the question is, who's going to conduct this band? He said, we're going to look at every band leader we've ever had, active and retired. If the person we wanted to retire, we're just going to call him back to active duty. So I thought, well, that's a lot of band leaders. I don't think I need to be concerned too much. And I went back with my Army field band. I was on tour, and I got a call and said, we want to come out and talk to you. You got to tell us what's involved with the touring band. So I went into great detail about all the things that had to be done, how the booking process was instigated and put into effect a year before the actual performance. The people booking the band are out doing their job. And so later I come back and they said, you know, we've talked about every band leader in the service, active and retired. I said, your name just keeps coming up. And said, we want you to do this band. So I went back to the Pentagon, and I worked for a wonderful General Sullivan. I said, General, had this come 10 years earlier, I would have jumped at the chance. It's a thing I would love to do, to put this together. I said, I'm ready to retire, and I want to get a university job before I turn 50. And he said, well, there's nothing wrong with being 50. He said, we've talked about everybody. He said, you're the only person that we think can do this job, and you just have to do it. Well, what do you do after that? You say, yes, sir. I will do this job for you. So I was at the next meeting in the Pentagon, and they said, Colonel Gibson, you've got 2 officers here. One is William Britton from the Navy, and the other is Jim Whittington from the Air Force. they are your staff. I said, well, now, will I be permitted to bring some of my own background staff to the organization? They said, yeah, you can bring up to 15 people. So I did. I got, first of all, the wonderful staff, and this sergeant that I mentioned, it was always at my right-hand side. And this was a humongous job. First of all, we had to create a professional band, most outstanding players to be found anywhere in the country. We had to find a location, and a lot of people had ideas about where this band should be physically housed. And we had to get the transportation, we had to get instruments, obviously high quality instruments for 65 players, and on a very constricted time frame. And that we did. I found a building. I still don't know how I got the band located where it was, which happened to be very close to my house. And had a building completely outfitted for this band. It was a wonderful, very large building, 3 stories. And we just had room for everything. We got the top quality of every instrument. And the players, I was authorized to take 20 players from each of the Washington band. And you can imagine how popular that made me with the other band leaders. And to pull their 20 best players out. But I had a job to do, and I was determined I was going to do it. So that's what happened. We had the wonderful players. I had fantastic clarinetist from the Marine Band, also a wonderful bassoonist from the Marine Band. And one of my players that recently was here for a Rhodes tuba player, all those from the Marine Band. And from the Navy Band, I had Brian Bowman. I mean, there is no other euphonium player in the country like Brian Bowman. And so, I mean, we rung out every Simone Mantilla solo that, and Brian just would nail them all. Incredible, and such a wonderful gentleman, still is. And those are the types of the players that we had. And I was actually transferred in June of 1974 from the Army Field Band to the Armed Forces, the United States Armed Forces Bicentennial Band. And in March of 1945, just about 8 months later, we gave our premiere concert at the Kennedy Center. And you can imagine of the ticket, everybody wanted a ticket for this band. And they were as scarce as Super Bowl tickets.
Was this band set to be in existence for an entire year, or was it longer? Or
2 years, yeah.
2 years, 2 years. Tell us about the audiences for whom you played. How many concerts? How many people in attendance? Estimations there?
I've got a book that has all those figures, the thousands of people that we performed for, the miles that we traveled. And
every state? Traveled in every state?
Oh, that'd be every state. Every state, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. Yeah. And one of the things we made as an original goal, we played every state capital too. So
hundreds of thousands of audience members.
Oh yeah,
at the very least.
Right. Yeah. huge.
And at the end of those 2 years, did the players return to their respective units? Some retired, I assume, but the band no longer was functioning, correct?
This is a little bit touchy. The agreement, the original agreement, and this was made by the Department of Defense, was that every player could return to his home unit. And that happened with every band except one. I won't mention the one. But in that band, they were very happy to take some other players. In fact, musician, Brian Bowman ended up in that band. But all of the players that had come from that band, they were not allowed to return. And
so this year, after your 2-year appointment as conductor of the United States Armed Forces Bicentennial Band, was that the culmination of your career?
Yeah,
did you retire?
Actually, I even a little before that, I had done everything that they wanted to get done, and I got it all on the road. It was all rolling, and I realized that I had accomplished what they wanted. I had created the band, and so I did retire. There was just a little time left, and
well, then after what anyone would label as a spectacular career in the military, nationally, internationally renowned, successful beyond the wildest hopes of most people, you put that aside and began a career as a college professor for the next 17 years, is that what at Columbus College, which is now Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. And that was where I first met you, I believe in 1977.
I went there, 77,
yeah, you came down, I believe that was it. And you had not a lot there. There was a fragmented, there were fragments of the program. There was a skeletal program in place. But, as I had alluded to earlier, not one to be daunted by the sometimes obvious things, lack of players, lack of facility, lack of those things. You set about, and I had firsthand knowledge of this, experience and observation of it, because we were neighbors, literally within a half mile of each other, our facilities were. And my first remembrance of meeting you, you came into my office one day and said, "Hi, my name's Hal Gibson. Do you have coffee in this band room, in this band office?" I said, "I certainly do. If it's a band office, we have coffee." And thus began a spectacular and wonderful relationship. But along this way, before we get into the Columbus College too deeply, because of your work, your accomplishments, your rise to an international acclaim as a conductor of band literature, you were inducted into the prestigious American Bandmasters Association, which is certainly the most prestigious organization of its kind in our country and arguably in the entire world. Some 50 to 75,000 band directors in the United States. There are less than 300 members that are elected to this organization. And you were elected to membership, and your work with ABA, the ABA's work through and with you. Before we get to Columbus College, tell us how you feel that the ABA tied in with the ABA's goals and missions, and as far as recognizing outstanding work and continuing the furtherance of that work. Share with us some of your ideas on the ABA and some of the things you've done with it over the years. And you've hosted some conventions, you've conducted a number of times, you sponsored members for selection of the organization, one of whom is fortunately was me. But we'll talk more about that later. But tell me a little bit about your interaction with the ABA and your involvement in the ABA before we go to Columbus State.
Before I was inducted in the ABA in March of 1970. And next March will be 2020. So that means I will have been a member of ABA for 50 years. That's a long time. one of my favorite stories to talk about what the ABA is and was. What happened in those days, the induction process, the selection process was highly secret. The individuals being evaluated were not permitted to know that they were under any type of jurisdiction like that. So it would always come as a surprise to these people to be called up and say, you've been voted into the ABA. And that happened to me. Of course, I was the commander of the Army Field Band at that time. And I got a call from Colonel Sam Laboda, who had young band. He said, Hal, you've just been voted into membership of the American Bandmasters Association. I want you out here tomorrow. I'm introducing you. I said, wow, that's a surprise. Well, the day he called me was March the 3rd, and I went home to tell Maria, I said, I'm involved in the ABA, and Sam Laboda says, I have to be there tomorrow. She said, tomorrow is my birthday. I said, yeah, I realize that. She said, well, that's my birthday. You're not going to leave on my birthday. I said, well, I said, Colonel Laboda says, I have to be there. He's entered. So, as has happened so many times in the last 70 years, where he had understood, and I headed for Ohio State. That's where the convention was. As I was checking into the motel in Columbus, the person right in front of me checking in was Carl King. And I thought, well, God, that tells me something. That's my first introduction to the ABA. And it was filled with, we still had Cliff Bainham, we had Ray Dvorak, you name it, everybody that was anybody still alive in the band field, they were the members. And I know that a lot of the people coming in today feel the same way, but the older folks, like myself, that was a time of band icons that was so meaningful to all of us, all of the people we had always heard about, and that, I guess that's true today with the younger people.
But, I think that's correct, because every year the younger people that are introduced will stand up after their introductory statements and make their comments, and inevitably they say, I look out into the audience and I see all my heroes, yeah. My heroes of the band world that I have heard about, grew up knowing about, and now I'm associated with them. But what you've been 50 years in the organization. What kind of changes have you seen? You mentioned, I know one just off the top of my head, you mentioned secret balloting of many years ago. Now it's not secret. It's very much of a thorough vetting process, but the candidates know about it. What are some of the changes you've seen, just with a broad brush, some of the changes you've seen in the ABA over the last many years?
Well, of course, in 50 years, we've had like 2 generations of new band leaders that come with new ideas. And the music has changed appreciably. They were still doing a lot of the old chestnuts that were so much part of the band world, and the old transcriptions that we all used to do. And these were people that had more or less created the world of band music. They had been some of the earliest college band directors. Of course, in the early days, the founders were primarily military and professional band leaders, not the college band leaders. So that's all changed. But we have now when I came in, there might have been one or two high school band directors, but they were nearly all still a lot of military band leaders and the college band leaders. But as time has changed, we've got now a lot of these young people that have brought the new ideas. We have new composers. The composers that were in, like when I came in, were Morton Gould, and, the people of that ilk. Then later, we had all of the folks of that period from the middle of the last century: Barney Chance, Cliff Williams, of course Francis Macbeth. So we had a lot of the composers that were bringing this new music to us. And of course, the Ostwald project had already been instigated, and that was bringing a lot of new music. But the music being played at the conventions now is really quite different from that in the early days when I was the first member.
Let's go back. Yes, and that ties into a number of other things you've said, and hopefully we'll comment on again soon, about the evolving of our profession and the things we're looking forward to, the lessons we've learned from the past. But now we're leaving the Armed Forces Bicentennial Band, and you're starting on yet another career, another successful career, as we now know. So you head from the Washington area to Columbus, Georgia, and you take the band job, the director of bands position at then Columbus College, which probably had a few thousand students there. I'm not sure of the enrollment then, but it was primarily a commuter college. It was at Columbus State, Columbus College there for the students there. And you come in and start a very successful tenure there. Tell us about what you found and what you wound up with and how you got there.
Well, to be honest, the first rehearsal that I held with the students at Columbus College was at night. And I came home from that rehearsal thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I said, this is by far the worst band I have ever had. My Irving High School band was far superior to this. What am I going to do? Should I just pack my bags and silently steal out under cover of darkness or see what I can do? So I began really instilling, first of all, a sense of purpose and a sense of discipline. There was no discipline in the band. And I know this was not met with 100% approval. They said, they've sent this old Army colonel to straighten us out. We don't want to be straightened out. We're hippies. And, but by the second year, we had them all in tow, and they had learned the value of discipline, of the establishment and implementation of goals. And they jumped on the bandwagon. And we began to made a big effort. Recruiting was a huge problem. And we began to really get the good players, and we were able to establish and finally create a very respectable organization. And I believe that by the time I'd been there, 7 or 8 years, I think it was considered to be the most outstanding band in the state. And we did play at a lot of some of the CBDNA regional conventions. And, the group just made a lot of progress. And the people that said it was the band that really put the college on the map. And we began getting the good students, and it led to what is there now, which is one of the finest music schools in the country.
Absolutely, and I go back to the adage that I've heard and used many times over the years, and that is it has everything to do with the person on the podium, and I saw firsthand what you did there. And I believe, if my memory serves me well, that the rehearsal hall at Columbus, now Columbus State University, is named after Hal Gibson. Is that correct? We have the Hal J. Gibson Rehearsal Hall. And those things do not come lightly and do not come without significant merit. So you retired once again from Columbus College. It still was Columbus College when you retired, correct? Yeah. It later became Columbus State University. Yeah, and you retired from there in what year?
91.
1991, and then moved back. Then we've come full circle. Then you moved down here and have had yet another career down here. From your wonderfully broad and insightful perspective, if we could kind of step back now and look at the macro, what are some of the major changes? I mean, there's so many small ones, but what are some of the major changes you witnessed in our profession, our band profession, over the last 50 years, let's say? Some that come to mind at this point in time. You mentioned earlier the literature with ABA. Obviously, that's a huge thing. What are some other things that you have seen, some changes? We would assume good ones, but there may be some that are not necessarily that good. What have you witnessed and observed on those?
Well, of course, the music is an essential factor, and it was necessary that the band create a body of literature that was distinctive to that medium. We had relied on orchestral transcriptions for so many years, and then we had an abundance of these tunes with the very fanciful names and the covers of the band parts, a beautiful picture of a waterfall or something like that, to say, no, we need literature that is of the highest standard and is written specifically for our medium. We deserve that. And that has been brought about. And with that has become an elevation in the acceptance of the concert band as a true artistic ensemble. And with that, fortunately, the conductors have risen in their esteem by the music-going public, and the concert bands are considered now an essential part of the educational process. And when I first began, bands were still, almost ancillary to the main educational pursuits, and oftentimes met in off-duty hours. But now they are essentially a part of the school curriculum. The funding for the bands has increased tremendously, and the acceptance of the conductors as true artists is now, I think, universal, particularly in our outstanding college bands.
Let me ask you, take a little different slant on things with regard to our profession, and offer your insights based on spectacular careers. What are some of the things that you would recommend? What are some things you might like to see changed, altered, adjusted in some way in our profession? Do we have too much emphasis on something, not enough on another? Is there, in this age of immediacy of information, of streaming live concerts, is that a good thing, or does that lend to the idea of I don't need to get up and leave my home to go to a concert? I can sit at my computer and listen and watch the concert. What are some of the things you would like to see changed or considered? Change may be too strong. What are some of the things we might consider in our profession today that impact us in the years to come, in your opinion?
Well, the streaming of concerts is, of course, a unique, new, and novel idea, and it does enable people to hear different groups that would be otherwise impossible. But on the other hand, I still think that there is nothing like sitting in the auditorium with those live sounds bathing over you, and in a beautiful, acoustically perfect concert hall. There's nothing like that, whether it be a symphony orchestra or a symphonic concert band. The experience of being in the audience when the concert is being performed makes you a part of the production. If you're watching this on some type of audio device, you're going to hear it, you're going to hear the music, but it's not the same sensation as being in the hall when the players take the breath and make that entrance. It's an excitement. I know I've sat in the halls of some of the great symphony orchestras, and you're just lifted up out of your seat in certain sections that are played. And I don't think that that's quite possible unless you are there with the players.
I think that may be one of the major challenges that we have as far as our profession is, when I say convince, it sounds a little patronizing, doesn't it? But to convince others, the non-musicians, of the importance of the work we do and the importance of being part of it by being present. I think that leads me to another thought I have, or seeking your advice on something else. The younger members of our profession, the younger conductors, have so many resources available to them today, unparalleled ever in the history of our civilization. So many things available to them, so many devices, so many networking capabilities, so many resources that they can call on. Sometimes there's a sensate overload. There's so much. How do they choose from what as to what they will use? So what advice would you give to those young men and women who are wanting to be part of one of the most noble professions, and that is of teaching and conducting? What, from your perspective of so much of life and so many successes in life, would you say to these young members of our profession? How can you be successful, and how do you find success? How define success in your life? Talk to me just a little bit about your ideas on that.
I think that the most important thing these young, newer band directors can do is to give totally of themselves to their students. The more they get involved with the students, the more they make themselves available to these students, to become a part of the students' lives, the more meaningful the band experience is to the young people who are a part of the band. And I think that ultimately they will enjoy a greater degree of success as they do. there was a wonderful movie that really pointed that out. And we all, I think everybody in the profession has seen it, Mr. Holland's Opus. I remember watching that film and said, I know everything that has happened in this film. Everything that Mr. Holland did has been done by one or more of the colleagues I have known over the past 70 years. And but his finally deciding to give of himself for these students, and it's such a touching moment with the young student who's in the service. And a lot of times the band director who is right out of college, he is so intent on perfecting his own skills and making himself a meaningful part of the program, the school, that he fails to realize it's the students that are going to bring it all about. I know when I was at Columbus College and we were beginning to develop some bands that had so many people said, oh, you've done such a wonderful job. I always say, no, it's not me, it's my strawberries. They said, well, what are you talking about, your strawberries? I said, well, my players are my strawberries. I said, you can be the greatest chef, but you can't make a good strawberry pie unless you've got really good strawberries. I said, I can't have a really good ensemble unless I've got good strawberries. And that's why I try to get the best strawberries I can find, and then I try to develop those that are not the best to become the best. But if you've got the strawberries, a lot of your work's going to be done for you.
I think that the point is so dramatically made when you say that our investment in our students determines our success. And we can't measure that necessarily in immediacy of return, ratings. That's one of the evaluations, those kinds of things. We can't determine success necessarily with that. But the investment, and the students know that we invested in them. I think that is a profound idea that we all understand, we all underscore. But in this music world of music making and conducting, there's so many high points, there's so many low points, but speaking to you today, here after a career of decades and decades, most of us could only have a partially successful career, and you had several successful careers. And I'm going to ask you, can you name some of your greatest musical accomplishments? And I don't necessarily mean a concert, a successful concert. It could be. But some of your greatest musical accomplishments. Think about that and talk to me just a little bit about what that might mean to you, based on your criteria you've given us earlier.
Well, you know, I'm not sure that we as individuals can always accurately assess what our accomplishments have been. It usually is left up to other people to say, this is what was meaningful and this is what is lasting. There are things that we do that we say that this was a real challenge. Obviously the challenge of creating from nothing a band that was going to tour the entire country in a matter of a few short months was a major accomplishment. To get the building, to get the, I remember one of the people I brought with me was a warrant officer band leader I had in 5 bands. He was in the very first band when I was called back into the service. He was with me in Germany when I came back to the state and I had the 2nd Army Band. He took what is called a short. He gave up so he could come join my band. And I had 5 players from that division band that did that. They gave up a lot of money to come, and 2 months after they've done that, I get my orders for the Army Field Band, and they said, well, we gave that money to be in your band. Well, I didn't realize what was going to be happening. But anyway, I had this, he had since become a band leader himself, and he would do anything in the world for me, to the point that he was just about to get me in trouble. We were out recruiting and getting all of this equipment. I came home very late one night from one of my recruiting trips, and Marie said, this general called, and he said he wants you to call him no matter what time you get home. Well, that's never a good sign. So I called him. He said, listen, Carl, you got to get that warrant officer in check, he said, or you're all going to be in a lot of trouble. And apparently he'd had a big run-in with one of this person's West Point classmates and was telling him that he was going to have this these bands and buses no matter what he said. That didn't sit well. And as an example, I said I wanted white staff cars with this huge logo of the Bicentennial Band. It was about a yard and a half wide, a big circular logo on the side of our buses and trucks. And they said, well, there are no white trucks in the Army, no white bands. I said, we're going to have them. They're going to be there. And another thing, they said there's a moratorium on vehicular acquisition for 2 years. Nobody in the military or the service is allowed to buy new rolling equipment. I said, well, this project will be over by then. And I had to fight for literally everything that we got, but we got it. So that was the fact that in March I had this group on the stage of the Kennedy Center from absolutely nothing. Well, it wasn't a con, but when I think back that some of the things that we've done, the establishment of new levels of sound and performance that were considered almost unheard of a few years before. Those are the things that
you, as you talk, I can hear you. I can hear you thumbing through your memory files, and so many people that have come across you've come across in your career, and so many people have influenced your ways and you theirs. Who do you consider to be some of the most significant people in your life and career? That's a tough one, I know, and I know you need to say, and you will say, first of all, Marie.
Well, of course.
And if you don't, we're both in trouble, but that's the easy part of it.
She still keeps me on the straight and narrow.
However that's defined. But who are some of the significant people in your career and life? Early, middle, now? What do you think about that?
Well, David, you know, I think that if you talk to any successful band leader, you'd say, who was your first influence? They're all going to say, my high school band director. I had an unusual experience. There was a person that came to Columbus, and he wanted to produce a film. What happened, Dick McMichael, that you remember, our newscaster, wrote an article about the Bob Barr Band that appeared in the Reader's Digest. And I read that one night. I used to always read something from the Reader's Digest when I go, and I said, that's a movie. That is an inspirational story. Well, this person in Hollywood read the same story. And he said, I'm going to make a movie about Bob Barr. And he came to Columbus, and he was talking to different people there, and he said, I need a technical advisor for this movie. Who should I get? Well, the guy that you need to get right here in town. He's over there at Columbus College. Name's Hal Gibson. So he contacted me. And I said, well, sure, let's start to work on this. We gathered about 10 or 12 band leaders from around the state. And to talk about this project and how we should proceed. And this person doing the movie, he said, oh, this person, Bob Barr, must have been extremely inspirational driving force. And they said that's true. Said some people from his band were there. But every one of these high school band leaders said, oh, you never met my high school band leader. They all thought that their high school band leader was probably the best that they had ever encountered. Every one of them. And I thought, well, that shows the impact that high school band leaders have upon their students, and many of them are not aware of that until after they retire or get ready to retire. And the student's so emotional when they say they're going to leave. But in my case, I was very fortunate to play in the Claxton High School band. We had one of the top band leaders in the country, Oakley Pittman. And in those days, when I was in high school, we still had the national band contests, the one that Mr. Sousa and Dr. Ravelli and so forth would judge. And the Claxton band was always in those. And Oakley Pittman was an extremely demanding, a tough guy. Had a big paddle that he used frequently. So, as it turned out, the second year I was at SMU, he was brought there to be director of bands. And so we became just great friends forever. We'd been friends, but there was a difference when you're a high school student. But later, and particularly after I became a military band leader and bring my band there. But Oakley Pittman was a great influence. So was James Nielsen. He played a big part in my life. And of course, as I said, I was so impressed by Victor Alessandro, the conductor. And there were others, and I've spent time with some of those, in fact, with Bill Ravelli. We became quite good friends as years went by, and I saw a totally different side of him than the people sitting in his band ever saw. And there were just a lot of these people that, another that always was very much influenced with Mark Hinesley. He was the true gentleman, just a perfect gentleman, as well as being a wonderful band leader and, of course, orchestrator.
Just a couple more ideas. Obviously, you and I have over the years sat and talked for hours upon end, but to try to bring this section of our interview to at least a pause, if not a short ending, a couple of things. If you could do this whole thing over again, this career, the last 75 years as you sit here, impressively interviewing at a long period of time, remembering details of the past and the present, and probably predicting the future for some of us. You're an inspiration to so many of us at the age of 95 years old, not just because of your longevity, but because of the things you have done and continue to do. But if you could do it all over again, what would you do more of, less of, or differently?
Oh, there probably would be things, but I'm not sure how I would change those. I let things happen as they just came about in many cases, and accepted whatever my lot was, and would try to make the most of whatever the situation was. But all in all, I've been so very, very fortunate. Things have just fallen in my lap. And that still continues to happen. And I have a very good friend now who is not a musician. He's my airplane partner. And in fact, he did not know that I was a conductor for a while. He was on this road that they had for me. And I was still an active flight instructor when I first met him, and he was going to come in an airplane, had to be checked out and given some additional training. I gave him that training, and about 4 years later, I asked him, I said, have you ever gone to a symphony concert? No. I'm not sure he knew what a symphony was. I said, well, I'm conducting the Space Coast Symphony this coming Sunday. I'd like for you to come. He comes to the symphony concert, never heard a symphony before. And I'm in tails when he is used to seeing me in a t-shirt and shorts, and as he says, the t-shirt always tucked in. And he couldn't believe it. And he said, well, first of all, he said, when you come out, you're laughing and talking with the all the people around the airport. And said, when you were on that stage, you had a totally different tone of voice. I wouldn't have even recognized you. So, how others see us is not always as we think that we appear.
Last thing for this session, if you will. And obviously this is, as you just said, it's left up to others to decide, but how do you think you and your work in our profession will be remembered? And if given a choice, how would you like to be remembered for all you've done?
I'm not sure I'll be remembered at all, but
that's not true, because we're recording today. You will be remembered.
I know my picture hangs on the wall in the fantastic facility of the Army Field Band, and I guess those players walk by and say, "Who is that old guy?" I think that he may have been Patrick Gilmore's teacher, from all I know. But this past August, they had every year the alumni meet, and they perform with the band and so forth. And this year,
the field band.
Okay, yeah. This year happened to be the 50th anniversary of the Jazz Ambassadors that I started in 1969. And so they were the featured performer, but all of the alums were asked to get up and speak about their time with the band, what it meant to them, and so on. And I was to be the last to speak. But the one right before me was retired Colonel Jack Grogan, who was himself a longtime commander of the Army Field Band. And he was always very serious. Those that know Jack, he's in the ABA, never smiled, never laughed, he's just all serious. But he began talking, he said, all of you sitting out here don't realize that you have this building because of one person. You have this rank that is so prolific throughout this band because of one person. You have the touring schedule because of one person. He said there's one person that was the commander's band, with an absolute fearless fighter. He would take on anybody to get what he wanted. And he went on and on. And he said, he's sitting right here. I was supposed to speak after that, and I said, I don't have anything to say. I think he said it all. But maybe with people like Jack Grogan of that. I'll be remembered for a few years anyway.
How would you like for people to remember Hal Gibson?
As somebody that loved what he did, loved his players, and was happy just to be a part of the movement.
And you know, Hal, I can say firsthand that that's been my experience with you. Every experience, every visit, every conversation, every communication has always been, what are we going to do next? Let's have some fun with this. There's so much excitement, so many things to get done. As Frank Sinatra used to say, the best is yet to come. Certainly, that's one of the many ways you'll be remembered. And anything else you'd like to add to this session we've got going before we shut this one down for the day here? Any closing comments from you on a very wonderful and insightful interview today?
Well, I would like to go back to the point that I made about the conductors of these groups getting so involved in the lives of their students. And we often fail to do that because we're just overwhelmed with details. It's a business that will just take your life over. And yet, these students come back to you years later and they say what their experiences working on you meant to them and what they meant in the years to come. And that's even true of these professional players. As I say, I'm just up there in August for the reunion of the field band. So many of those players came back and mentioned some little one thing that I had done that I remembered it all, and how much that one thing had meant to them. And if we make a sincere effort to get into the lives of our students, we're going to be remembered. But that's for sure. You know, one of the things, like when I first had retired, of course, the Bicentennial Band had so much publicity, your name was there, so I was in quite demand, to be honest, for as a guest conductor and adjudicator, but a lot of guest conducting. I went all over the country. And I have always learned so much from those that were working as a part of my group. My college students, they don't realize, I'm going to tell them, yeah, I got some of my best ideas come from them. I've been doing this for 50 years, but they have ideas that never occurred to me. And one of my students, one of the very first students I ever had, Francis Macbeth, who also was in great demand as a conductor, he said, one of the things that he did before he went to be the conductor of an all-state or whatever, asked to be sent a roster of all the players. And so he would virtually memorize that. So during the first rehearsal, he'll stop and tell, instead of bass drummer, he'd say, Jimmy, I want you to stroke the drum. And Betsy, your oboe is it. And said to call all of them by name made a huge imprint on them. And so I started doing the same thing. I got that idea from Fancy. I said, give me the names, and I would have the names, and I found it really made a big difference for those bands.
Well, speaking of big differences, Colonel Hal J. Gibson, you've made a big difference for so many. And we sit here this Wednesday afternoon, November 6, 2019, and to celebrate the fact that you were 95 and a half years old. I believe that's about correct. I think you were 95 in May.
Yeah.
And you're going as strong as ever, still with appointments, conducting, arranging, writing, rehearsing. And as I've said to you over the years, you've got to slow down because my wife keeps comparing me to you, and you've got to back off, Hal, and give me a break on some of this. But it's what a treat to visit with you as always, and what an honor to call you a colleague and a mentor of mine. And as so many say that over the years, and have said over the years, and will continue to say. So thank you for spending time with us this afternoon, and best wishes for all that's coming your way. And thanks again for everything. Hal J. Gibson.